Hey everyone, Tony D with another hot take. And this one's on the stimulus package. 2 times the Democrats shot it down. 2 times. They are more than aware that shooting down a stimulus package like this, number one, they can split up the various things in the stimulus package and pass some and not pass others, and discuss others and not pass some. Number two, the Democrats have for too long rested on their laurels. And what that means is they only exist today under the pretense that Republicans are for the rich, Democrats are for the working man. That trope is all but dead. When's the last time you saw the Democrats really do something for the unions? The last time I can recall is when Barack Obama bailed out a major corporation just to save the jobs. And was that really for the unions? You could argue that it was. But I would argue that it was also for the corporation so they could continue to donate. There is no unions without business. There's no one to unionize against without business. Part of this package is to keep the economy going so business doesn't grind to a halt and things collapse. Now, from a libertarian perspective, what I would have done is I would not have given the order for anyone to close. I wouldn't have given it as an order. I would have made it optional. If you want to go out and continue to get sick, that would be your business. But also, I would also make it that hospitals wouldn't have to treat you. If you were going to be that irresponsible, they might say, well, you're on your own, pal. You should have stayed in. And with that sort of thing at stake, people might take this more seriously. Part of the reason that teenagers are going down to Florida is because they're not taking this threat seriously. They figure, well, you have to help me. That's the law. I mean, that is the law in a hospital, by the way. If you're sick or injured, hospitals have to treat you. That's the law. Well, what if it wasn't? What if a hospital could say, no, we can't treat you. We don't have enough beds. We don't have enough ventilators. We're full. Go somewhere else. What if they did that? Or you'd be a lot more involved with your health care, wouldn't you? You'd be like, whoa, wait, I gotta call the hospital and make sure I got a bed ready in case, I get hit by the pandemic. I better make sure I don't get sick at all. But these kids don't care about that because, well, they think they're going to be fine. They just assume, you got to help me. That's the law. That's part of the entitlement that it's not just the young. It's people going all the way through history in the United States because, quite frankly, we've had it pretty easy in the United States for a long time. And when you have it easy, you tend to think, everything will work out. And usually it does. Or at least that's what I think. I'm part of the generation that, had it pretty comfy. So the Democrats are no different, even though most of them are very old. They think, well, everything will work out, but this is their opportunity to, use the corona beer virus as a wedge in order to get what we want. And, you can see by this package that it's pretty pork-filled, as they say in Washington. Full of pork. It's full of things like stuff for climate change and diversity quotas and getting stuff like 2-week paid vacation all the time. And Trump is pretty adamant that he's not going to sign it. Now, normally, back in the 80s, the Democrats and the Republicans would have come together and they would have said, well, okay, you want some of this stuff in your package. We'll give you a couple of things. You give us a few things and we'll call it a day. It would already be a done deal. But now that's not the case. Pelosi is trying to push forth an extremely, in my view, radical stimulus plan. And understand that Democrats don't understand economics. So whereas I disagree with the stimulus plan in total, the Republicans at least have a working knowledge of how business works. At least most of them do, because most of them were in business. Certainly Trump does. So at the very least, you could argue, even if there's going to be a lot of graft and corruption, and there probably will be, at least they'll put it in places in the country that will benefit, and the economy will grow, and we'll be back to where we were a lot sooner. The Democrats have things in the stimulus package that include, like, the arts, which, you know, that is not, it's not a time to be doing that. You know, and of course, Biden's going to argue, and he's already arguing in his live stream, that Trump didn't do things soon enough and he didn't put the money in the right place. I mean, one of the sad things is to watch cartoonists, comic cartoonists, that normally back in the day were seemingly very up on issues and would do these comics about politics, and they would be, man, right on the money. You know, when you talked about Bush's war, boy, these comic books were right, you know, or comics, I should say, not comic books, but, like, you know, the political comics, they'd be right on the money. I just saw one, you know, and it's just based on the, for lack of a better term, left-leaning media that they watch. I mean, that's all there is to it. I've been watching Trump's press conference, and he seems genuinely worried about people, and it's no wonder his poll numbers are through the roof. He seems to be handling this crisis very well. I cannot believe that Biden can't bring himself just to support the president, because he doesn't have to support him forever, and a month from now he could start criticizing him and saying, well, you know, I supported him during the crisis, of course, because you have to do that, but here's where he went wrong. Like, a month from now, 2 months from now, that'll be the time. Instead, it's relentless. I think a lot of this goes back to the Bush administration's policy of attacking all enemies on all fronts. And when you look at the Democrats, they're often behind the curve now in terms of what the new thing is. Rather than act, they tend to react. And to react to Bush, they instituted the Bush-like policy of attack all enemies on all fronts at all times, which for the Bushites worked to a point, but they too were resting on their laurels, and they were hurt for it. They were hurt for that behavior. The Democrats have adopted that position without adopting what they should be doing, is adopting Trump's populist position, which Bernie Sanders sort of has done, and they would have much better luck. But instead, they're like, I don't know, 20 years behind the curve, adopting Bush's policy of attack on all fronts, you know, use wedge issues whenever possible, and it's blowing up in their face. I mean, the poll numbers, you know, don't lie, and the media is so beholden to the left side of politics. In most of the mainstream, you see these ridiculous articles written by Democratic pollsters. I mean, Tim Pool was just talking about one in the Atlantic. It was written by a Democratic pollster who admits in the first sentence that, you know, in one poll, Trump is up at 55% approval. That's an incredibly high number for a modern president. And, you know, he then proceeds to tell you why that number isn't particularly worthy of your notice and why really everybody hates Trump. No, the people who are trapped in their bubble, the people who have been trained by media over and over again to hate Trump, yeah, they agree with that sentiment. Oh, yeah, that must be the case. I mean, obviously 55% of people don't approve of Trump. That can't be true. These are the same people who told us he was going to lose in a landslide in 2016. There is a bias in the media, and just like the politicization of people has gotten worse in the United States, so has too that bias. That bias, you know, as people who are truly centrist and truly journalist, and, you know, they're not zealots, as they either leave the media, do independent stuff online, or finally just say, F it, I'll become a shill. You know, those sources of news have been degraded over in time. And the worst part about that degradation is there's still a core of people who will still watch it and believe it. Not because it's true, but because they want to believe it. They have to believe it. They cannot process that Donald Trump is doing an okay job, that people like the job he's doing. So with that, and I've talked to people like that, and they cannot see past the blinders. They'll look for any piece of evidence that supports their point that Trump is a bad president. That he's not just bad, that he's destroying the country. Like, it's not even like a halfway measure of like, well, I don't think he's doing a very good job. It is, he is destroying democracy. He is destroying the country. He is a tyrant. He's never going to leave office. We have to stop him. I mean, that's the level of Trump derangement syndrome that we're still dealing with. And you can blame most of that on Twitter, on the media, and places like YouTube. They just reinforce it again and again and again. And you could just go on YouTube, even now. You have Tim Pool's videos, for instance, and the next video to line up will always be something from one of the major networks, CNN, MSNBC, or Fox. Now, mostly I get Fox because sometimes I watch Fox clips, but every once in a while it'll be CNN or MSNBC, and they're just living on a different planet. Even Fox News, they have bashed the president, but at least they'll give some time to the other side. I'm not a huge Fox News guy. I always thought they were very biased. But they've changed. They're not the same. Just like the Republican Party is not the same. This is not the Republican Party of the 80s. I was there in the 80s. I remember what the Republican Party was like. It was different. Rick Santorum, when he was in office, I don't think he's in office anymore, he was a guy who said outrageous things, and people would be rightly mad at him for saying horrible things about gay people on the floor of Congress. And you'd be like, oh, what a jerk. But that's not happening anymore, and people can't seem to just get past that. Will there still be graft from the Republicans and corruption? Oh, absolutely. But to ignore the ridiculous amount of graft and corruption on the Democratic side, which unfortunately a lot of Democrats do, is just insane. I've been arguing with people online, over the phone, and it's just again and again and again. Well, the Democrats are trying to help the working man. No, they are not. They may be trying to tangentially come up with some sort of policy that they could call helping the working man, but there is a real knowledge gap between the left side of politics and the right side of politics about economics. It's a very tough thing to accept, but Democrats are really bad at economic stimulus. The only guy who was even close to being okay at it was Bill Clinton. And Clinton had the dot-com boom behind him. He had a good era where things were going very well. So, his policies weren't to blame or not to blame for the good economic times during his time, but he at least had an idea of like, well, we got to get the budget down or the deficit down, and he had guys behind him who were okay with that, but he also had Republicans pushing against him for that, and they came to a consensus, and it worked fairly well. Now, you can argue that, yeah, you had Newt Gingrich and the guys who pushed impeachment on him, and they were jerks, but they also had a point. I mean, you look back on Clinton now, and Clinton was up to shenanigans in the Oval Office with his intern. I mean, it's clear now, and he should have just come out and said it and been done with it. And he didn't want to do that for political reasons. He paid the price, but the Republicans paid the price of impeaching him. The Democrats are going to pay the price of impeaching or trying to impeach this president. They're going to pay a very hefty price for voting against this stimulus twice. It's going to be bad. They're not going to get what they want out of this. It's going to be a horror show come November for these Democrats. It is going to mirror the UK. you're going to see Republican populism sweep the Democrats out of power, probably for at least a generation. It won't be until the Republicans have been in power so long and had so many excesses that you'll finally get some Democrats that can fight against that. And that's a shame. They don't have to go that far. But Pelosi is out of options, and she refuses to check her ego. And I think it's a lot to do with ego. She acts very high and mighty. You know, Trump's kind of a crude, obnoxious guy, but Pelosi is very high and mighty. She doesn't like to be challenged. She thinks she's all that, and meanwhile, she represents a district that has a poop patrol on the streets. And she's very arrogant about that. She's very arrogant about the fact that literally you put a stick up to run for office in San Francisco, put a D next to its name, and it'll be elected to office. I mean, she's actually said that. And that's arrogance. And what is it? Before hubris comes the fall, or something. Before the fall comes arrogance. I don't know. Some old saying about that. So I think you're looking at an absolute disastrous November. Trump was going to win no matter what, but I think the Democrats had a chance to keep the House. I think there's no chance they keep the House now. I think they will keep the handful of districts like Pelosi's. Pelosi will be reelected even, and maybe AOC. Certainly there'll be a Democrat there, and you're just going to see Democrats get wiped out in purple states. They'll just get wiped out, and in some long blue states like New Jersey, which has, shall we say, dabbled in republicanism, you're going to see some Democrats lose for the first time. Republicans are putting their hands together and looking at the future, and it's going to be an absolute massacre, just like it was in the UK for the Liberal Dems there. And this stimulus package and this nonsense of asking for environmental stuff and diversity quotas, and it's nonsense. So you should be asking for that in this bill. Should have just passed a quick, lean bill. If you're going to pass it, again, against the stimulus, but if you're going to pass it, pass the damn thing and pass it quickly, or it will do no good. So goodbye, Democrats. Guess you're going to the dustbin of history for a while.